And welcome to a video lecture for Mr. Mosier's 8th grade American history class. This is the first part of a three-part series that will look at the causes of the American Revolution, the main events that will lead to the British colonies in North America, the 13 British colonies, declaring independence to form the United States. So the textbook for this reading for this particular lecture series comes from Chapter 3, Section 5, Conflict in the Colonies in our United States History textbook. The guiding questions in this section of the video will be: who are the following groups, people who, and what were their role in the cause of the American Revolution? Patriots, Loyalists, Neutralists, and King George III, so know those three people. What is tyranny? How would you describe the relations between the colonists and the British before 1763? And then what event caused this relationship to kind of change? What was the Proclamation of 1763 and how did the colonists react? What was the Stamp Act of 1765 and how did the colonists react to this? And then what does repeal and boycott mean? And then what did the colonists mean by saying no taxation without representation? So those will be kind of our guiding questions for today's lecture, and you should be able to answer these questions at the end of this presentation. So some terminology here. Patriots. The colonists that will call for the independence of these British colonists become known as the Patriots. So these are the American colonists. They kind of associate with the idea that there's an American identity that should be separate from Great Britain. The Loyalists were British colonists that didn't really associate with the Patriots, who felt that we should stay loyal to the crown and to the mother country of Great Britain. Neutralists were kind of the colonists who were somewhat in the middle. They weren't really sure which side to fall. So, they didn't know if they should join the Patriots or the Loyalists, and they were kind of in the middle. We don't know specifically how many of the colonists fit these categories, but a good rough estimate is about a third, a third, and a third. So about a third were strong Patriots, about a third were pretty strong Loyalists, and then about a third is kind of those in that neutral category. But it really varies from kind of colony to colony and even community to community. Tyranny is a term that we use to describe the unjust use of government power. A ruler who is kind of a bossy, authoritarian kind of person, we usually refer to them as being a tyrant, right? They don't listen to us, they kind of abuse their power, and they don't protect the rights of the citizens that which they rule. So tyranny is an important concept to kind of understanding the frame of reference that the colonists were kind of working with. King George III, another very important figure in the American Revolution. He will be the crown prince, the ruler of Great Britain, and who will oversee all of the British Empire, including the colonies and the North American continent. And he will become a very central figure along with the British Parliament, which is kind of their legislative passage of laws part of the British government system. Before 1763, for the most part, there was kind of Britain and the colonies have a pretty decent relationship. They sort of rely on each other for trade and for governance. It kind of varied from colony to colony, but a lot of colonists had a lot of self-rule. There's a royal appointed governor that kind of oversaw a lot of the day-to-day government operations of the colonies, but the colonists also had a tremendous amount of voice in the terms of laws and things that they had to live under. Now, the colonists lived thousands of miles away from the British government, from the seat of London in England, across the Atlantic Ocean, and for the most part, at least from the colonist perspective, they felt that they were kind of left alone. And this is all going to change really after 1763 because of the international conflict that will occur that the colonies will be involved in. The French and Indian War will be a war fought for 7 years among the British and the French governments, the countries of France and Great Britain. And a lot of these conflicts will take place around the world, but especially in the French and British colonies in North America, this conflict will definitely take a place there as well. Now, in the world, it's called the 7 Years' War, but here in the United States, we usually refer to this as the French and Indian War. It wasn't the French versus the Indians. It was the French and their Native American allies on one side versus the British, the American colonists, and our Native American allies on the other side fighting in this conflict. Now, the British will end up winning the war, but like all wars, it's really, really expensive. Wars cost a lot of money to pay for soldiers, supplies, bullets, weapons, and it was just very, very expensive. And after the war, there was a kind of a desire by the British government not to continue the hostilities between the Native American tribes, that even though their side kind of lost in the conflict, the British government didn't want to kind of perpetuate or keep the war going between the American colonists and the Native Americans. And those two kind of facets, the war just being very expensive and a desire of the British government to kind of keep the colonists and the Native Americans separate, is what's going to kind of trigger a huge turning point in the relations between the British government and their American colonies. And this begins with the Proclamation of 1763. A proclamation is just kind of like a king's statement that here to all my loyal subjects, this is what we want to do. So the Proclamation of 1763, King George III and the British government will pass this proclamation that basically draws an imaginary line, and you can kind of see it here on the map here, along what's known as the Appalachian Mountains, which was kind of the far western boundary of the colonies. And that line was kind of a line in the sand that said, we, the British American colonists and the 13 colonies, were not to travel over that line into this territory on the west part of the Appalachian Mountains. And that was to kind of keep the Native Americans and the colonists separated so that there would be more conflict. Now, the American colonists were very much outraged by this because they felt, as participants fighting for the crown and for the British government, that they should have access to those lands for settlement and development. And so many colonists kind of ignored that proclamation and went across the Appalachian Mountains anyway, which led to conflicts within the Native American tribes that were living there. Another piece of legislation that will be passed will be the Stamp Act of 1765. This will be passed by British Parliament. It was a law requiring a stamp placed on all pieces of paper. Basically, it was a tax on paper. So newspapers, wills, licenses, playing cards, like if you're playing rummy or poker, those kinds of cards, that all had to be paid with a tax. And for a lot of the colonists, they were very upset by the tax and actually led to riots in Boston over this passage of this law. And so the colonists, very angry by this tax, began boycotting paper, refusing to buy the paper, and then eventually it forces the British government to repeal or cancel the Stamp Act, kind of as a reaction to these riots that break out in the colonies, as well as this boycott that was taking place that was very effective. To repeal just means to basically take back or cancel a law. To boycott means to basically refuse to buy. So if you are upset with a business, you can say, I'm going to boycott them. I'm going to stop buying from them. And usually it's organized. Many people have to participate in order to kind of hurt the business. So in the case of the Stamp Act, it gets basically repealed because there's a large number of colonists that just stop buying paper, and it ends up hurting those businesses, and they're not collecting the tax revenue that they wanted, and so eventually they will repeal the law. A common phrase you'll kind of hear associated with these passage of these laws is this idea of no taxation without representation. This was kind of a slogan sometimes that the colonists would utter, where basically they're saying that we understand that when you live in a society, you're going to have to pay taxes to pay for things that government has to do. That's just kind of a given. However, they were very angry that the colonists weren't getting a say in the kinds of taxes that they had themselves to pay. So if we have to pay taxes, then we should have a voice in the British government and the Parliament over there thousands of miles away in England. And that's one of the things that made the colonists so upset. It wasn't so much that they were paying taxes, it's that they didn't have a say. They felt like, I don't have a voice in the kinds of laws that I have to live under. And that's just not fair to me. So this has been the kind of the first part here of the kind of the lead up to the American Revolutionary War. As we think about some of the causes of it, the French and Indian War leaves the British government very broke. They need money and a desire to kind of keep the two sides, the colonists and the Native Americans, away from each other so they don't keep killing and fighting each other. And they need to raise taxes to pay for the war debts. And that's going to kind of change some of this relationship between the American colonists and their mother country, their home country in Great Britain. And so this is going to lead us to more and more conflicts. So thank you for listening. As always, if you have questions, please make sure you come talk to your teacher. Thank you.